Welcome to Classical Conditioning, or CC Part 2. Higher order conditioning is that after the initial CSCR relationship is created, you can start to add more relationships by adding more neutral stimuli. So it becomes almost like a web of CS to CRs and multiple CSs to CRs. So Pavlov first developed this as a CSCR connection with a bell to salivation. And then what he did was he added a light. So he added the light, the bell, the food, the salivation. Light, bell, food, salivation. And eventually the dogs started to salivate to the light, and they also salivated to the bell. So he made two connections with that initial food to salivation unlearned connection. So, an example of higher order conditioning is when you have that attraction to arousal that we talked about with Donna and Jack. With the attraction to arousal, that's your US to UR. You add first to it something like men, that you're attracted to men. So, men become the first CR. You pair men to attractive to arousal enough times, and then a man becomes attractive and aroused, and a man creates arousal. Then you add that you like brown-eyed men. So now the brown eyes gets paired with the men attraction and arousal, and now brown eyes creates arousal. Then you add that the men are friendly or outgoing. So now outgoing brown eyes um and men to attraction to arousal. Friendly brown eyes, men, attraction, arousal. The friendlies and outgoing makes you aroused. And we just keep adding these neutral stimuli to the front of our connections to make more connections and more connections. Little Albert and Peter are famous experiments that were done in order to look at classical conditioning, specifically with fears. So John Watson believed that all fears were classically conditioned except for loud noises and loss of support. So he said the only two fears that we had that we were born with that were innate, unlearned, were loud noises and loss of support. So he worked at John Hopkins, and in the orphanage at John Hopkins, there was a little boy named Little Albert. And Little Albert was an 11-month-old boy, and he brought him into his office and conditioned him to be a fear a white rat. And if you watch that YouTube video, it'll give you like how the experiment took place. But what he did was he basically created the white rat. The white rat came into the room, and every time the white rat got close to little Albert, he would bang a mallet against a metal pole behind little Albert's head. So the loud noise got associated with the rat, and what ended up happening is the rat created the fear. And he said, "Look, I created fears in children." So, what he then said was that anything that we pair with a loud noise or loss of support can create a fear. So, if you think about it, think about like spiders. So, a lot of people are afraid of spiders, but are they afraid of the actual spider, or when they were a little kid and they saw the spider crawling up their wall, were they afraid because they lost support from their family? Like maybe mom jumped on the table and started screaming, or maybe she started screaming and ran out of the room. And what they did was they associated that neutral stimulus of the spider with the loss of support of their mom running out of the room, and that created the fear. So now the spider creates the fear. So he said that if we create fears, then we can take them away by the same process of classical conditioning. So he took another boy named Peter, who was 3 years old, and he was already afraid of a white rabbit. And what he did was he said, if we pair this with something positive, we can then take away the fear. So every time the white rabbit came in the room, he would give Peter a toy or a piece of candy or something, or bring in his friend to play with. And eventually, Peter who was deathly afraid of the rabbit, eventually he stopped having that fear. And he said, so if we can create these fears by adding them to loud noises or loss of support, then we can take away the fears by adding something positive. So think about it. Like if you're afraid of heights, for an example, if you go up into an elevator with somebody you love to a 60th floor to look out the windows around New York City, let's say, then will that decrease your fear because you pairing it with something that's positive, that you're with somebody you love? And John Watson said yes, that that would decrease the fear. And eventually, if you paired it enough times, it would take the fear away. So we're going to try this classical conditioning with the little Albert experiment. So after the bad car accident we had last year, I cringe and break into a sweat at the sound of squealing brakes. So think about it. When you have a bad car accident, what happens? You have a loud noise, and that creates a fear. The loud noise of the cars crashing together creates the fear. So you have the car accident or the loud noise that creates the fear, and then the brakes, the squealing brakes, then create the fear because you then associate that loud noise with the accident. So that's how we create fears of things that not are necessarily not something to be afraid of, but we create it by pairing it with the loud noise or the loss of support. Now, where do we see CC in contemporary world? Well, the first place we see it is in taste aversions. So taste aversions are a little different than all the rest of the conditioning. Most of the time, you need to have multiple pairings in order to get a connection to stick. But with taste aversions, you only need one pairing to create it for to occur. And the illness can actually occur up to 12 hours after the food was consumed, and you can still pair it as a CS-US connection. Okay. So think about this. The last time that you got sick with something, like let's say you started vomiting after having food, and you may have been vomiting because you had the flu, a stomach virus, or something like that. But do you associate that food with the illness? And we're going to give that a try. We've got Bill, who couldn't ever remember being so sick and nauseated. He would never go to that restaurant again, and he would never eat chicken again. All he could think about was the good dinner his mother was preparing. As he entered the kitchen, he became flushed and felt nauseated when he saw the golden brown turkey sitting on the table. So, what he's done, first of all, is going back to those concepts, is he's generalized the chicken to the turkey. Okay, as all poultry is bad now. But what we have to remember is that he's not really concerned about the chicken, like lots of people eat chicken. So we have to go general of what was the problem with the chicken at the restaurant, and it was bad food. Bad food created the illness, and then the chicken was associated with the bad food that created the illness. So the chicken now creates illness. And then we go a step further, and he's now put the turkey in the mix. So now poultry creates the illness. Where else do we see classical conditioning in the contemporary world? In drug use. So, drug use, the people, places, and things that are associated with the use of drugs are classically conditioned. When you think about drug use, um, there may be neighborhoods that you think about that are more heavily drug populated than other neighborhoods. There may be people that people think about that are associated with a substance. There may be like a couch or a car that's associated with a substance, things that are around. When you think about drug use, the people and the places and the things are all neutral. What I might think is associated with drug use, somebody else may think, no, that's not associated with it. This is what's associated with it. But when you pair the person, for an example, with the using, and you continually use with one person, then that person becomes associated with the use. And that's how the pairings start to occur. And what are some factors that influence CC? Well, one of the factors is the reliability of the CS to predict the US. So when Pavlov did this experiment, he rang a bell, he put the food down right away. He rang the bell, he put the food down. If he would have rang the bell and then sometimes put the food down, sometimes didn't, the reliability wouldn't be good. And because of that, the connection wouldn't be strong. But because he rang the bell and put the food down every single time, right one after the other, it had a strong connection and strong reliability that one would lead to another. The number of pairings, the more pairings you have of something, the more likely you will keep that connection. So if you ring a bell every time you feed your dog and you put the food down right after you ring the bell, the dog will create that strong connection between the bell and the food. The intensity of the US. Some things are more important to some people than other people. So we have a connection of loss of support to fear. Well, if you're a very independent person, loss of support may not be that big of a deal. Like you may have done a lot of stuff by yourself. So therefore, if you pair something with loss of support, the person may be like, nah, pretty low intensity. It's not really bothering me. But then if you have somebody who's really strong in needing people to support them, if you pair something with loss of support, then the person may be like one pairing or a couple pairings and the connection's there. And the CS needs to be right before the US. So he rang the bell, he put the food down. You can't ring the bell 5 minutes later, put the food down. You have to make the connection be one right after the other. And lastly, in our wrap up, here's a YouTube video just to kind of look at classical conditioning again. But for now, that's it. So have a great week. And next time we'll talk about operant conditioning.